Hello and welcome to this instructional video. In this video, you will receive all relevant information regarding how a first officer should respond to a crime scene. You will then have to read an example case study and answer a series of 7 questions that constitute our pop quiz. This quiz has been generated to test your learning ability and knowledge regarding everything discussed in this video. When responding to a crime, the first officer should primarily be concerned with the following phrases: preservation of life and scene safety. The first officer's paramount concern is the preservation of life, and he must execute the duties necessary to fulfill this aim. If a victim is present at the scene, suffering from a sustained injury, the first officer must quickly provide the necessary assistance in addition to calling for medical personnel. Additionally, if the suspect is still present at the scene, the first officer must ensure that the suspect is removed from the scene as soon as possible. The scene of a crime, even if the perpetrator has already fled, is nonetheless inherently dangerous. The first officer must understand that, most likely in a rather expeditious manner, the crime scene will be active as varying members of the police department begin to perform their investigative duties. Additionally, it is possible that the crime scene imposes the threat of danger to the general public residing in the nearby area. Therefore, the first officer, upon arriving on the scene, must perform an assessment of safety. The following must be taken into consideration. Suspect or suspects. The individual or individuals who perpetrated the offense in question may still be present at the scene of the crime. These suspects, respective to the nature of the offense, may pose significant risks for the officer attending the scene. Therefore, it is the responsibility of the first officer to register the suspect's location and accessibility to the crime scene. Weapons. If the crime scene was violent in nature, then there is a high probability that a weapon, such as a firearm or knife, is present at the scene. It is imperative to ensure that all suspects and victims are distanced from these weapons. Hazardous conditions. Crime does not discriminate in regard to setting. An officer may be responding to a stabbing that took place in a gaudy mansion or a fatal shooting that occurred in a condemned and dilapidated building. The first officer must register potential structural deficiencies, such as a broken step or missing floorboard, that pose dangers for other officers. Animals. An aggressive dog, for example, may be present on the scene. As previously stated, in the pursuit of scene safety, it is necessary to determine whether or not the suspect is present at the scene of the crime. It is possible that the suspect fled prior to the arrival of the first officer to avoid detection. However, if the suspect is still present at the scene, then it is necessary for the suspect to be removed from the scene without delay. If the officer has a reason to believe that the suspect committed the criminal offense in question, then the suspect will be arrested at the crime scene. We can now turn to the Ontario Major Case Management Manual as it outlines how to proceed after the offense. Washing hands. Under any circumstance, it is most pragmatic to not allow a suspect to wash their hands. Depending on how the crime scene was perpetrated, the suspect may have important evidence, such as gun residue or blood spatter, on his hands. Clothing and footwear. The suspect should not be allowed to tamper, remove, or discard the clothing and footwear. These items may contain general evidence, bloodstain evidence, or trace evidence relating to the criminal offense. For example, the victim's hair could be entwined in the fabric of the suspect's sweater. Hair and biological samples. If needed for the purposes of comparison, the suspect's hair and biological samples should be collected as soon as possible by the respective members of the forensic team. After addressing the scene safety concerns, the first officer can move on to securing the scene. This feels like a necessary step, but we must ask ourselves, why does a crime scene really need to be secured? Well, the crime scene must be secured for the following reasons. 1. To prevent the contamination of evidence. 2. To preserve the integrity of the crime scene. 3. To minimize safety concerns. 4. To help prevent uninvolved parties like the general public from accessing the scene. And 5. To help prevent involved parties, such as the suspects, from accessing the scene in order to remove or tamper with the existing evidence. Now, what exactly constitutes a crime scene? Is it simply the location where a criminal offense took place? Well, a crime scene encompasses the following: any area where a crime was committed, all areas where evidence is known or suspected to be located, all areas where evidence was known to have been located, all areas that include potential entry and escape routes. Once the scope of the crime scene is determined, then scene boundaries or a perimeter must be established. This is most commonly achieved with the use of physical barriers such as crime scene tape, pylon cones, or temporary barricades. Now we will discuss 4 further details to be mindful of. 1. An outdoor scene. If the crime scene is outdoors, like a public park, then it will likely be more challenging to secure the scene. An outdoor scene presents a perpetrator with a far greater number of potential entry and exit routes. Additionally, an outdoor scene is subject to the elements, such as rain, which may destroy potential evidence. Therefore, it is necessary to quickly secure and process an outdoor scene. An indoor scene. If a crime scene is indoors, such as an apartment unit, then it is often easier to establish a scene perimeter. Indoor scenes allow a perpetrator less freedom in movement. Crime scene size. It is always easier to decrease the size of a crime scene. If a crime scene is too small, then the evidence located outside the bounds of the crime scene would, most likely, already be destroyed or heavily contaminated. It is also important to establish a path of contamination, which is a pathway for the purposes of entering and exiting the crime scene established by the first officer. This established pathway will be used by all other investigators to limit the degree of avoidable contamination. The process of securing evidence is an integral part of crime scene management. When securing a piece of evidence, the first officer must do everything to ensure its inclusion in the courtroom. Evidence can easily be excluded from consideration in a courtroom due to improper or unlawful search of a person or a person's property, not adhering to proper protocol when collecting, marking, or preserving the evidence. The evidence is contaminated, and a failure to maintain a chain of continuity. Therefore, to ensure court admissibility, the first officer must be mindful of contamination and the maintenance of the chain of continuity. This table outlines exactly how to prevent the contamination of evidence. Officers should not eat, drink, or use tobacco products at the scene. Officers should wear personal protective equipment, such as sterilized rubber gloves. Officers should refrain from touching or moving evidence without a legitimate purpose. Officers should remain mindful and attentive. Photographs, video recordings, and sketches can be taken to underscore the integrity of evidence. And officers must follow established protocol. For example, bloodstained items, when possible, should be packed in a paper bag or envelope. Now we will look into maintaining the chain of continuity. It is the onus of the responding officers to track every exhibit, being a physical piece of evidence, from its location at the initial crime scene to the courtroom. A judge must be certain that an exhibit that is being considered in the courtroom is the very same exhibit that was once present at the crime scene. Maintaining a chain of continuity ensures that the administration of justice remains reputable. Judges can reject the legitimacy of an exhibit based on lost continuity. An example of a standard chain of continuity is as follows. An exhibit is present at the crime scene. It is thus transferred to a main exhibit holding locker, and then it is used as evidence in the courtroom. An exhibit log should be filled out for each piece of evidence to demonstrate the chain of continuity. Officers must note 1. Where an exhibit was found, 2. Who found the exhibit, and 3. Anybody who made contact with the exhibit. It is important to note that if an exhibit is taken out of the main exhibit holding locker for the purposes of analysis, then this occurrence and each similar occurrence must be tracked and documented in the exhibit log. We will now discuss the legal issues concerning search and seizure. You are the first officer arriving at the scene of a crime. You have already been briefed about the situation over the police radio. A man brandishing a firearm was seen entering a home. Neighbors reported hearing a struggle and then the firing of a gunshot. It is unknown if the man with the firearm left the scene of the crime. As the first officer, are you permitted to now enter the home and perform the necessary search and seizure of important evidence? Do you require a warrant in order to do so? Well, if one of the necessary exigent circumstances is present, then a warrantless search and seizure is permitted. These exigent circumstances exist when there is an imminent danger that the evidence being sought will be lost, hidden, or destroyed if the search is delayed. The officers believe on reasonable and probable grounds that their safety or the safety of others is at risk. In respect to the search of an individual, the search is performed incidental to a lawful arrest. Therefore, in consideration of our example, the exigent circumstances thus allow you to perform a warrantless search and seizure. The suspect may still be in the dwelling place, participating in the destruction of evidence. The safety of those inside the home is at risk. Additionally, the suspect, in possession of a firearm, may pose a threat to the public safety as well. If the suspect is present at the scene, then the suspect must be arrested without delay. Once lawfully arrested, the suspect can be searched for further evidence. Given the nature of most crime scenes, these exigent circumstances should be present. However, in the absence of such exigent circumstances, a warrant is necessary to proceed with a search and seizure. Witnesses to the crime warrant great consideration as they possess important information regarding the execution of the offense and the perpetrator or perpetrators involved. The first officer on the scene must first identify the witnesses to the crime. Then, the first officer must ensure that the witnesses are thoroughly interviewed. The first officer, if not preoccupied with other matters, can perform the interview. Otherwise, the first officer can instruct another officer to interview the witnesses. When conducting an interview, it is important to adhere to the following steps. Collect all preliminary information. Make sure to note down names, addresses, and telephone numbers in regard to the witnesses. Do not ask suggestive questions. Ensure that you are, especially in the beginning of the interview, asking non-suggestive, open-ended questions that allow the witness to recount their narrative in a free-flow manner. For example, do ask the following question. I understand that you are a witness to the crime. Can you tell me about everything that took place here tonight? Do not ask the following question. I understand that you are a witness to the crime. Did you see the suspect enter the home through the front door? This question is suggestive and may warp the witness's memory of the events. Ensure that all details are addressed. If further clarification is required, then the officer can paraphrase or employ close-ended questions. For example, an officer can state, I understand that you saw the suspect flee the scene in a Honda. What was the color of the vehicle? And finally, an officer must show understanding. The witness may be distraught. The officer should be aware of this possibility and conduct the interview accordingly. Of course, the witness's testimony should be copied legibly and accurately in the officer's notebook. The first officer, or any other officer on the scene, should use their police notebook to collect all relevant information relating to the crime scene and consequent investigation. What do you include in your police notebook? Sketches and diagrams. An officer should complete a sketch of the crime scene. The sketch should clearly display the location of any evidence. Scene Security Register. In order to complete this register, the first officer must record the identity and arrival time of everyone who entered the crime scene after he or she got there. Witness information and witness testimonies. An officer should collect all pertinent information regarding the witness, including the witness's address, name, and contact information. The witness testimony should be written down verbatim in one's notebook. Exhibit log. As previously discussed, an exhibit log outlines the chain of continuity for a particular piece of evidence. Details, points of concern, and questions. All other important details regarding the crime scene, such as dates and times, should be recorded. If an officer registers anything suspicious or worthy of further consideration, this should be noted down as well. If an officer has any questions, these should be recorded such that they can then be addressed at a later time. How to deal with the media. When dealing with the media, it is important to control the flow of information. The media and the public will want to be informed of the situation and the ongoing investigation. It is important to share some information regarding the crime scene to quell these concerns. However, the dissemination of information should be limited and calculated. Provide the necessary message to the public. Do not share information that will jeopardize the investigation. For example, if police publicly state that they are looking for a particular piece of evidence, such as the murder weapon, then the offender will likely try to destroy this item. The dissemination of sensitive information can also lead to sensationalism in the media. In such a case, a competent defense counsel can even argue that the negative media sensationalism of their client will disturb the fairness of the trial and the impartiality of the jury. Limiting the flow of information helps prevent such claims and thus facilitates successful prosecutions. Additionally, the investigative team should select one designated spokesperson who exclusively talks to the media. This way, it is easier to ensure that the same information is being disseminated at all times. Finally, in the age of social media, information moves faster and fact-checking becomes a difficult process. A police department should use its respective social media account to discuss the incident and help dispel sensationalist views. I hope you were paying attention because it's now time for our pop quiz. Now please, carefully read the case study on the following slide. Once you have read the case study, please answer the questions on the subsequent slides. The correct answer will follow each question.
Paul Jones, a middle-aged high school teacher, lives alone in a single home in the Ottawa area. Apart from teaching, he produces music as a hobbyist, thus keeping several pieces of expensive music equipment in his home. On the night of December 6, 2024, at approximately 2:35 a.m., three masked perpetrators entered Jones' home after tampering with the back door. The perpetrators, using some blunt object, broke the door's locking mechanism. The three individuals proceeded to steal Jones' music equipment. Jones awoke from the noise and cautiously crept downstairs to see the theft in progress. At this time, Jones confronted the perpetrators, stating aloud, "If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the police," in order to silence and subdue Jones. One of the perpetrators grabbed an ashtray off Jones' family room table and used the ashtray to strike the side of Jones' head. Jones was thus rendered unconscious from the blow and collapsed upon the floor. The three perpetrators, using the open back door, moved the music equipment from inside Jones' home to the rear compartment of their cargo van. Once the robbery was completed, the three perpetrators entered the vehicle and fled the scene without delay. Jones' neighbor, Agatha Barnes, heard banging and cluttering noises coming from Jones' home. Startled by such sounds at that time of night, she got out of bed to look out her window. At that time, she saw the three masked perpetrators enter the cargo van and flee the scene of the crime. Barnes immediately calls the police. You are briefly informed of a robbery over the police radio, but the details of the incident remain nebulous. You are given the address, and you quickly drive to Jones' home. You are the first officer to arrive at the scene. Please fill out the following outline to detail how you will fulfill your investigative duties.
If you so please, you can use this outline to collect key pieces of information that you gathered from reading the case study. Question 1. You are the first officer to arrive at the scene. Your primary concerns are the preservation of life and scene safety. You enter the home cautiously to see Jones collapse on the floor. He is bleeding from a wound located on the side of his head. He has regained consciousness but is struggling to get up. How do you proceed? Please choose the most accurate response. 1. Understanding that the collection of evidence is important, you disregard Jones to begin a search of the crime scene. 2. You run outside, knock on a neighbor's door, and demand that the neighbor call the paramedics. Or 3. You administer whatever aid possible, radio for medical assistance, and continue to provide whatever further assistance is necessary for the preservation of Jones's life. The correct answer is answer 3. Other officers and the required paramedic team arrive on the scene. Once the scene is secured, you go to collect a witness statement from Jones's neighbor, Agatha Barnes. Is the following statement true or false? When collecting a witness statement, it is unnecessary to note down the witness's address and telephone number. Police only have a finite amount of time at the scene. Collecting such details is a waste of time. In reality, it is necessary to note down all relevant information regarding a witness, such as the witness's address and telephone number. Therefore, the statement is false. Question 3. Please read the following outline of an incident that took place in Alberta on March 3rd, 2005. 4 RCMP officers were executing a search warrant on James Roscoe's farm. The officers were in search of stolen trucks and a marijuana grow-op that were found on Roscoe's farm. Roscoe, however, returned to the scene of the crime, being his farm, as 4 RCMP officers were conducting the search and seizure. Roscoe then shot and killed the 4 officers. That day is now imprinted in the memory of the Mayerthorpe RCMP department, a "where were you" moment that will never leave them. Now, please answer the following question. Since the suspects fled the scene, you and the other officers investigating Jones's home are no longer at risk of violence. Is the statement true or false? In 1 or 2 sentences, please explain why. This statement is false. The suspects can always return to the scene as evidenced by the incident in Alberta to inflict violence upon the investigating officers. This speaks to the importance of monitoring the crime scene perimeter. When conducting your search, you find an ashtray on the floor. The edge of the ashtray is covered in blood spatter. Could the blunt end of this ashtray have been used to strike Jones alongside the head? This is a possibility, and you thus collect the ashtray as evidence. Which of the following answers represents a viable chain of continuity for the bloodied ashtray? 1. Crime scene, detention center, used as evidence in the courtroom. 2. Police cruiser, crime scene, main exhibit holding locker. 3. Crime scene, main exhibit holding locker, detention center. Or 4. Crime scene, main exhibit holding locker, used as evidence in the courtroom. The correct answer is answer number 4. It is the onus of the responding officers to take note of every exhibit. List 3 things that you, as an officer, should note in your exhibit log. 3 things that you should note in your exhibit log include where an exhibit was found, who found the exhibit, and anybody who made contact with the exhibit. Question 6. You failed to competently document the chain of continuity for the ashtray you found at the crime scene. As a result, the ashtray can be deemed inadmissible as evidence in a court of law, thus jeopardizing a successful prosecution. Is this statement true or false? This statement is true. Question 7, which is the last question of our pop quiz. You, the first officer, are designated by your supervisor to be the media spokesperson regarding this incident. Upon leaving the scene of the crime, you're stopped by a reporter working for a local news station. The reporter asks you, "Excuse me, officer, the public is concerned. Can you please tell me about what happened here tonight?" In 3 complete sentences, please draft your media response. The following is an example of a viable media response. A breaking and entering and a subsequent robbery took place here tonight. The homeowner was assaulted. He has been taken to a local emergency room for medical review. The perpetrators are still at large, but police are diligently investigating the matter. Thank you for viewing this instructional video and participating in the pop quiz.